The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse like 1,000 urgent fingers trying to get inside. Vincent Harper stood motionless in his study, staring at the glowing city 40 floors below. His reflection in the glass looked like a stranger, a hollow man wearing an expensive suit. The whiskey in his hand had gone warm an hour ago, untouched despite his grip on the crystal tumbler. At 42, Vincent had built an empire in artificial intelligence that had made him one of the youngest billionaires in Manhattan. His face graced magazine covers. His opinions shaped markets. Yet tonight, alone in 12,000 square feet of marble and steel, he felt like he was drowning in silence. The apartment smelled faintly of lemon polish and fresh linen. The cleaning staff had been through earlier, erasing every trace of human presence except his own. Everything gleamed with cold perfection. No dishes in the sink. No books left open. No evidence that anyone actually lived here. Vincent walked to the window and pressed his forehead against the cool glass. Below, the city pulsed with life he no longer felt part of. Somewhere down there, people laughed in restaurants, held hands on street corners, told each other truths that mattered. Up here, he existed in a carefully controlled vacuum where nothing expected could reach him. His phone buzzed with the 100th notification of the day. Another board meeting. Another acquisition. Another problem that money could solve. He turned it face down without looking. The apartment suddenly felt smaller, despite its vast size. The walls seemed to press inward. His chest tightened with a familiar pressure that had nothing to do with the weather outside. Vincent set down his glass with shaking hands and tried to breathe. But the air felt thick and insufficient. When the walls closed and his vision blurred at the edges, the room tilted sideways. Vincent's knees buckled, and he sank to the floor, his back against the window he'd just been staring through. His heart hammered so violently he was certain something had ruptured inside his chest. The panic gripped him like invisible hands around his throat. Not again. Not tonight. He fumbled for his phone, but his fingers wouldn't cooperate. The device clattered across the marble, sliding out of reach. Vincent gasped for air that wouldn't come. His body convinced it was dying, even as his mind screamed that this was just another attack, just another episode, just another night of falling apart in private. The sound of a key turning in the lock barely registered through the roaring in his ears. Footsteps approached, soft and cautious. Through his blurred vision, Vincent saw a figure stop in the doorway of the study. A woman with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing the gray uniform of the cleaning service. "Mr. Harper?" Her voice cut through the panic like a lifeline. "Are you hurt? Should I call someone?" Vincent tried to answer, but only a strangled sound emerged. He pressed both hands against his chest, convinced his ribs were cracking. The woman moved quickly, crossing the room and kneeling beside him without hesitation. Up close, he could see her face properly for the first time, despite having employed the same cleaning service for 2 years. She had clear gray eyes that held no judgment, only concern. Her name tag read Claire Bennett. "Look at me," Claire said firmly, but gently. "You're having a panic attack. You're safe. Nothing is wrong with your heart." Vincent's wild eyes found hers and latched on like she was the only solid thing in a tilting world. "Breathe with me," she continued, her voice steady as a metronome. "In through your nose for 4 counts. Hold for 4. Out through your mouth for 4. Can you do that?" She demonstrated, breathing slowly and deliberately. Vincent tried to mirror her, his first attempt ragged and unsuccessful. But Claire didn't rush him. She kept breathing, kept counting quietly, kept her eyes locked on his, until gradually, impossibly, his body began to remember how. One breath, then another. The crushing pressure in his chest loosened by degrees. The roaring in his ears faded to the sound of rain again. Vincent's hand stopped shaking quite so violently. "That's good," Claire said softly. "Keep going. You're doing fine." They stayed like that for several minutes, breathing together on the floor of his study while the storm raged outside. Vincent couldn't remember the last time another person had been this close to him. This present, this real, the weight of silence when his breathing finally steadied. Claire sat back on her heels but didn't leave. She picked up his phone from where it had fallen and set it within reach. Then retrieved his abandoned glass of whiskey and placed it on the side table. "I'm sorry you had to see that." "Don't apologize," Claire said simply. "Everyone breaks sometimes." He looked at her properly then. This woman he'd barely noticed despite seeing her weekly for months. She had the kind of face that suggested she'd seen difficult things but hadn't let them make her hard. There were faint shadows under her eyes that spoke of her own late nights and early mornings. "I thought everyone had gone home," Vincent said, needing to fill the silence with something. "I left my notebook in the kitchen earlier. I was just grabbing it when I heard." She gestured vaguely at him at the scene she'd walked into. "Your notebook?" "I write sometimes." On breaks? She seemed almost embarrassed by the admission. As if having a life beyond cleaning was something she shouldn't mention, Vincent pushed himself into a sitting position, his back still against the window. The panic had receded but left behind a bone-deep exhaustion. He felt raw and exposed in a way that should have bothered him more than it did. "Do you get those attacks often?" Claire asked, not prying but not pretending it hadn't happened either. "More than I'd like to admit," Vincent said. The honesty surprised him. He never talked about this. Not to his therapist, not to anyone. Yet here he was, sitting on his study floor with his maid, speaking truths he'd buried under layers of control. Claire nodded as if she understood. "My father used to get them. After my mother died. The first one scared me half to death until I learned what was happening. I'm sorry about your mother. It was a long time ago." Claire's expression softened with old grief. "But thank you." The rain continued its assault on the windows. Lightning flickered somewhere over the East River, briefly illuminating both their faces in stark white light. In that moment, Vincent saw something in Claire's eyes that mirrored what he felt, a loneliness that came from carrying too much alone for too long. "What do you write about?" he asked, surprising himself again. Claire smiled slightly, the first real smile he'd seen from her. People, moments, the things that happen when nobody's performing. For anyone else? Sounds honest?
House.
The only kind of writing worth doing. Lost Vincent's gaze drifted to the bookshelf. Behind his desk where a single photograph sat among the business awards and industry accolades, Claire followed his look and saw the image of two people, Vincent and a woman who shared his dark hair and sharp features. They were younger in the photo, laughing at something outside the frame. "Your sister?" Claire asked gently. Vincent's jaw tightened. "Natalie. She died 3 years ago." "I'm so sorry." "Everyone says that," Vincent said, not unkindly. "But sorry doesn't change anything." Claire was quiet for a moment, then said, "No, but maybe it reminds you that you don't have to carry it alone." The simple statement cracked something open in Vincent's chest. He'd spent 3 years building higher walls, working longer hours, surrounding himself with success and isolation in equal measure. He'd convinced himself that was strength. But sitting here with this woman who'd found him at his weakest, he wondered if he'd just been running, the words spilling out before he could stop them. Programs for writers who couldn't afford formal education. Grants for people with stories nobody thought were worth publish. I thought it was naive. We argued about it constantly. She sounds like someone who saw value where others didn't. She was better than me in every way that mattered. Vincent's voice cracked. And the last conversation we had was an argument about funding, about money, about things that don't matter at all. Claire didn't offer empty reassurances. She just listened. And somehow, that was exactly what Vincent needed. "The foundation she started," Vincent continued. "I shut it down after she died. Told myself it wasn't sustainable. But really, I just couldn't face what she'd been trying to build. Couldn't face my own failure to see what mattered to her." The admission hung in the air between them. Vincent had never said those words aloud, had barely let himself think them. But they were true. And speaking them to this near stranger felt less frightening than he'd imagined. An unexpected connection. "It's not too late," Claire said softly. "To honor what she cared about." Vincent looked at her, really looked at her. "How do you do that? See the better path when everything feels impossible?" "I don't always," Claire admitted. "Most days I'm just trying to make it through. But I think your sister understood something important. That people's stories matter. That giving someone a chance to tell their truth can change everything. Did you ever try? Vincent asked. To tell your truth? Through your writing? Claire's expression shifted, something vulnerable crossing her features. Once. I applied for a grant from a foundation that supported emerging writers. Got rejected? Around the same time, my father's condition worsened, and I had to leave school to care for him. The writing became something I did in stolen moments, instead of something I pursued. What foundation? It doesn't matter now. It shut down years ago. And Vincent's chest tightened with sudden dread. What was it called? Claire hesitated, then said quietly, the Natalie Harper Creative Trust. The world stopped. Vincent stared at her, understanding crashing over him like a wave. This woman sitting beside him, this person who'd just helped him through his worst moment, had been one of the dreamers his sister believed in. And he'd killed that dream without ever knowing her name. Claire, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I'm so sorry. She shook her head. You didn't know. That doesn't make it right. They sat in the heavy silence, the truth settling between them. Outside, the storm was beginning to pass, the rain softening to a gentle patter against the glass. Inside, something had shifted irreversibly. Vincent stood slowly, offering his hand to help Claire up. When she took it, he felt the calluses on her palm from years of work, from sacrificing her dreams to care for someone she loved. Stay, he said. Please, just for a while. I don't want to be alone right now, and I think maybe you understand why better than anyone else could. Claire searched his face, seeing past the billionaire to the broken man beneath. After a long moment, she nodded. They moved to the sitting area where the city lights painted everything in shades of gold and shadow. Vincent made tea because neither of them needed more alcohol. They sat across from each other, two people from completely different worlds, bound together by loss and loneliness and the strange intimacy of honest vulnerability. Dawn broke over Manhattan in shades of pink and gold, painting the penthouse in gentle light. Claire had left some time after midnight, but the space felt different now. Less like a museum and more like a place where something real had happened. Vincent stood at the same window where he'd collapsed the night before. But this time his chest felt lighter. He couldn't stop thinking about what Claire had said. About his sister. About the foundation. About dreams deferred and truths untold. By 8 in the morning, he was in his private office with files spread across his desk. The Natalie Harper Creative Trust archives, boxed up and stored 3 years ago, now laid bare before him. He'd avoided these documents like they carried a contagion. But today he needed to see everything his sister had built and everything he'd destroyed. The grant applications made a stack 6 inches thick. Each one represented someone who believed their story mattered enough to risk rejection. Vincent flipped through them with growing discomfort, seeing names and dreams he'd dismissed with a single administrative decision to shut everything down. Then he found it. Claire Marie Bennett, application dated for years prior. Her submission included 3 short stories and a personal essay about finding beauty in ordinary moments. The writing was luminous, filled with the kind of emotional honesty that made his sister's notes in the margins enthusiastic and detailed. This writer sees the world the way we need more people to see it, Natalie had written. Recommend full scholarship plus mentorship program. But the application had a red stamp across the top. Denied, program discontinued. Dated 2 weeks after Natalie's funeral, signed by Vincent's executive assistant, following his orders to close all foundation operations immediately. Vincent's hands trembled as he read Claire's personal essay. She wrote about her mother's death, about learning to find grace in grief, about the responsibility of caring for her father even as her own dreams slipped away. The prose was achingly beautiful, and Vincent understood exactly why his sister had fought to support writers like this. He'd stolen this from Claire without ever knowing her name. The weight of that realization made him sick. Crossing lines over the following week, Claire continued her regular cleaning schedule, but something had fundamentally changed between them. Vincent found himself timing his work to be home when she arrived. They didn't speak much at first, just exchanged careful nods and small acknowledgments. But the awareness between them hummed like an electric current. On Thursday evening, Vincent found Claire in the library section of the penthouse. standing before the floor-to-ceiling bookshelves with a distant expression on her face. She held a dust cloth but hadn't moved in several minutes. "See something interesting?" Vincent asked from the doorway. Claire startled, then gave him a slight smile. "Sorry, I got distracted." "You have an incredible collection." Most of them were Natalie's. She was the reader. "I just kept them after she died." Claire's fingers traced the spine of a worn paperback. "She had good taste. This one changed my life when I was 16. She pulled out a novel Vincent didn't recognize. Its cover faded and pages dog-eared. "What's it about?" "A woman who gives up everything she wants to take care of her family, then slowly realizes she's disappeared into their needs. It's about finding yourself again after you've been lost for so long." The parallel to Claire's own life wasn't subtle. Vincent stepped closer. Did she find herself again? Eventually, but it took her a long time to believe she deserved to. Vincent studied Claire's profile in the soft lamplight. "Do you believe you deserve to?" Claire met his eyes then, something vulnerable and defiant mixing in her expression. "I'm working on it." "I've been looking through Natalie's files," Vincent said carefully. "I found your application to her foundation." Claire's face went carefully blank. That was a long time ago, not long enough for it not to matter. Vincent pulled a folder from behind his back. "These are your stories. The ones you submitted. I read them last night. You had no right, you're right." "I didn't." "But Claire, they're extraordinary. My sister was correct about everything. You should have received that grant. You should have had the chance to develop your voice without having to choose between your dreams and your responsibilities." Claire's eyes glistened, but her voice stayed steady. "What's done is done. You can't change the past by reading old applications. No, but maybe I can change what happens next." The offer and the risk. Vincent handed Claire the folder. Inside were her original stories along with Natalie's detailed notes and recommendations. But there was something else too. A check and a letter on official foundation letterhead. "I'm reopening the Natalie Harper Creative Trust," Vincent said, "with a specific focus on supporting writers who've had to sacrifice their work for family obligations. Writers like you." Claire stared at the documents without touching them. "This is guilt talking," partially, Vincent admitted. "But it's also the first thing that's felt right since Natalie died. She was trying to tell me something with that foundation, about what matters and what doesn't. I wasn't listening then. I'm listening now. You can't buy forgiveness by throwing money at old mistakes. I'm not trying to buy anything. I'm trying to do what I should have done 3 years ago. Honor what my sister built. And maybe give people like you a second chance at the dreams you had to put aside." Claire finally picked up the letter, reading it slowly. Her hands shook slightly. The grant amount was substantial, enough to support a year of focused writing without financial worry. But her expression remained guarded. "Why now?" she asked. "Why after all this time?" "Because you helped me breathe when I couldn't. Because you saw me at my worst and didn't look away. Because reading your words reminded me that there are things in this world worth protecting, and most of them can't be measured in profits or stock prices." "This feels complicated," Claire said quietly. "You're my employer. This crosses lines that shouldn't be crossed. Then I'll terminate your employment with the cleaning service right now. I'll hire you directly as the Foundation's first writer in residence. No cleaning, no power imbalance, just a grant recipient doing the work she was meant to do." Claire looked up sharply. "You can't just rearrange everything because you feel guilty. Watch me." For a long moment, they stared at each other across the library, the air between them charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. Vincent knew he was offering something that would change both their lives, possibly in ways neither could predict. But for the first time since Natalie died, he felt certain he was doing the right thing. "I need time to think," Claire said finally. "Take all the time you need. The offer stands regardless." But as Claire gathered her things to leave that night, Vincent saw something in her eyes that looked like hope beginning to take root. And he realized that helping her reclaim her dream might be the only way. He could forgive himself for abandoning his sisters. When secrets surfaced, the next 2 weeks passed in careful negotiation. Claire didn't immediately accept the grant, but she didn't refuse it either. She continued working while Vincent restructured the foundation. hiring an independent board to oversee operations and ensure everything remained ethical and above reproach. They talked more during those weeks than they had in all the months before combined. Claire shared pieces of her life, the father she visited every evening in a memory care facility, the writing she did on subway rides and during lunch breaks, the dreams she'd convinced herself were childish until Vincent insisted they weren't. Vincent opened up too, about the pressure of building an empire, about the loneliness of success, about how his sister's death had broken something in him he didn't know how to repair. Claire listened without judgment, asking questions that made him think differently about his choices. It felt dangerous and necessary, in equal measure. This growing intimacy between them. Vincent knew they were venturing into territory that could destroy them both if they weren't careful. But he couldn't seem to stop, neither could Claire. Then the photograph appeared. Vincent's assistant found it first, sent anonymously to several major media outlets. The image showed Vincent and Claire sitting together in the penthouse library. Late at night, their heads closed together over an open book. The lighting and angle made it look intimate, possibly romantic. Definitely inappropriate for an employer and his maid. The tabloids exploded within hours. Billionaire's secret affair with Maid screamed one headline. Tech mogul caught in workplace romance scandal, declared another. The stories were sensational and mostly fabricated. But the damage was immediate and devastating. Vincent's phone rang constantly with calls from board members, investors, and attorneys. The company's stock dipped. Social media lit up with commentary ranging from supportive to vicious. Everyone had an opinion about what the photo meant and what kind of man Vincent Harper really was. But the worst part was what happened to Claire, the price of being seen by noon. Claire had been terminated from the cleaning service. The company released a statement distancing themselves from any inappropriate relationship and emphasizing their strict professional standards. Claire's phone number somehow leaked online, resulting in hundreds of messages from strangers, some curious, some cruel, some offering money for her story. Vincent tried calling her immediately, but she didn't answer. He sent messages that went unread. When he showed up at her apartment building in Queens, the doorman turned him away with an apologetic expression, saying Ms. Bennett had requested no visitors for 3 days. Vincent existed in a state of barely controlled panic. The media circus continued, but he barely noticed. All he could think about was Claire, alone and under siege because he'd been careless, because he'd let himself care without protecting her first. On the 4th day, his attorney delivered news that made Vincent's blood run cold. Claire had given a brief statement to one media outlet, like a simple paragraph that read, "Mr. Harper and I had a professional relationship only. The foundation grant was offered based on merit through a proper application process. I ask for privacy as I deal with the loss of my employment and the invasion of my personal life." The statement was careful and diplomatic, but Vincent could read between the lines. Claire was protecting him while her own world fell apart. She was taking the blame, absorbing the scandal, disappearing quietly so his reputation could survive. He couldn't let that happen, the truth goes. Public Vincent called a press conference for the following morning. His attorneys advised against it. His board members threatened resignation. His public relations team begged him to reconsider. He ignored them all, standing before 24 cameras and 3 times as many reporters. Vincent Harper did something he'd never done before. He told the complete, unvarnished truth. 3 years ago, my sister Natalie died in a car accident. I was driving. We'd spent the evening arguing about her foundation, about whether supporting unknown writers was a worthwhile use of resources. I thought her mission was naive and financially unsound. She thought I'd lost sight of what mattered beyond profit margins. The room was silent except for the click of camera shutters. After she died, I shut down her foundation. I told myself it was a practical business decision. But really, I just couldn't face the evidence of everything I'd failed to understand about my sister while she was alive. In closing that foundation, I denied grants to dozens of applicants who deserved support, including Claire Bennett. Vincent pulled out Claire's original application and held it up. Ms. Bennett applied 4 years ago with a writing portfolio my sister called exceptional. The application was denied not because of any lack of merit, but because I ordered the entire program discontinued 2 weeks after Natalie's funeral. He set the papers down and looked directly into the cameras. Claire Bennett came into my life as an employee of a cleaning service I hired. I barely noticed her for months. Then one night she found me having a panic attack and helped me through it with more compassion than I deserved. In talking with her afterward, I learned about her deferred dreams and eventually discovered that I had been the one who'd helped kill them. The reporters were scribbling frantically now, but Vincent wasn't finished. I reopened my sister's foundation specifically to correct my mistake and to honor what Natalie believed in. I offered Claire the grant she should have received years ago. There was no affair, no impropriety, no abuse of power. There was just one person trying to make amends to another person he'd wronged, even if he hadn't known her name at the time. Vincent took a breath, steadying himself for what came next. But here's the part that matters more than the scandal or the speculation. Claire Bennett is a remarkable writer with a voice that deserves to be heard. She's sacrificed her dreams to care for her father with Alzheimer's disease. She's worked multiple jobs while writing stories on subway platforms and during lunch breaks. She represents exactly the kind of person my sister wanted to support, someone with talent and dedication who just needed a chance. He looked down at his prepared notes, then pushed them aside. The truth is, I've spent 3 years hiding from grief and guilt behind wealth and isolation. Claire showed me that being human means being vulnerable sometimes, and that connections matter more than control. She didn't do anything wrong. She just had the misfortune of being kind to someone whose life is lived under constant scrutiny. The room erupted with questions, but Vincent held up his hand. I'll answer everything you want to know about the foundation, about my sister, about my mistakes. But Claire Bennett deserves to be left alone. She's not part of this story except as someone who got hurt by my failure to protect what should have stayed private. If you want a villain in this narrative, I'm right here. Leave her out of it. Aftermath and absence, the press conference went viral within an hour. The response was mixed. Some praised Vincent's honesty while others remained skeptical. But the tone of coverage shifted noticeably. Claire's name appeared less frequently, usually accompanied by sympathetic descriptions of her circumstances rather than salacious speculation. Still, she didn't contact him. Vincent threw himself into rebuilding the foundation properly this time. He assembled an independent board of literary professionals, established clear grant criteria, and set up a transparent application process. He donated a significant portion of his personal wealth to ensure the program could operate for decades regardless of what happened to his business ventures. But none of it felt meaningful without knowing if Claire was okay. 2 weeks after the press conference, Vince's new assistant handed him a package that had arrived by courier. Inside was a simple envelope with his name written in familiar handwriting. He opened it with shaking hands. The letter was brief. Thank you for telling the truth. It cost you more than it should have, and I'm sorry for that. I've decided to accept the grant, but I need time away from everything that's happened. Going to stay with my aunt upstate while I write, and while my father receives care in a facility there. Maybe distance will help us both figure out what any of this meant. Claire. Vincent read the letter 3 times, looking for hidden messages that weren't there. She was accepting the grant, but putting distance between them. It was the wise choice. The safe choice. The choice that protected them both from further complications. It also felt like losing something precious before he'd fully understood what he was holding. He sat at his desk as evening fell over Manhattan. The city lights beginning their nightly performance. The penthouse felt emptier than it had before. Claire entered his life, and Vincent understood with painful clarity that some silences were louder than others. His phone buzzed with another business crisis requiring immediate attention. He ignored it, staring instead at Claire's letter and wondering if doing the right thing was supposed to feel this much like grief. Outside his window, the city continued. Its endless motion, millions of lives intersecting and diverging in patterns too complex to predict. Vincent pressed his hand against the glass, feeling the cold seep through, and made himself a promise. He would honor his sister's memory by making the foundation everything she'd dreamed it could be. He would give Claire the space and support she needed to reclaim her voice. And he would learn to live with the uncertainty of not knowing if their paths would cross again, or if that one honest night had been both the beginning and the end of something he'd never quite find words to describe. The truth had set them both Free, but freedom sometimes looked a lot like loneliness. The Natalie Harper Creative Trust reopened on a crisp October morning, 6 months after the scandal had faded from headlines. Vincent stood in the renovated brownstone that now served as the foundation's headquarters. Watching as the first grant recipients arrived for orientation, the building had been one of Natalie's favorite properties, a 3-story gem in Brooklyn with high ceilings and walls that seemed to hold stories in their very bones. He'd spent half a year transforming this space while Claire remained upstate. They'd exchanged exactly 3 emails in that time, all brief and professional. She confirmed receipt of her grant funds. She thanked him for the foundation's work. She mentioned that her father had good days and bad days but seemed comfortable in his new facility. She never mentioned returning to the city, and Vincent never asked. Instead, he channeled everything into making Natalie's dream real. The foundation now supported 20 writers annually, providing grants, mentorship, and a physical space where they could work without distraction. The building had writing studios, a library, a communal kitchen, and small apartments for those who needed temporary housing, every detail reflected something Natalie had sketched in her journals. Plans she'd made that Vincent had dismissed as impractical. Now he understood that the impractical things were often the most necessary. "Mr. Harper?" A young woman approached, nervously clutching a folder. "I just wanted to thank you. This grant means I can finally finish my novel. I'd almost given up." Vincent shook her hand, seeing in her hopeful expression all the dreams he'd almost crushed by shutting this program down. "Your work got you here. The foundation just opened a door." But even as he said the words, he thought of Claire. She should have been here for this moment, walking these halls as the foundation's first success story. Instead, she was 200 miles away, writing in isolation while he rebuilt something they'd briefly shared. The manuscript arrives 2 weeks later. A package arrived at Vincent's office. No return address, but he recognized the handwriting immediately. Inside was a manuscript, 200 pages of Claire's writing, bound with a simple clip and accompanied by a note. "You asked me once what I would paint if I could paint anything. This is my answer, written instead of painted, but hopefully still true. It's finished because of the grant, because of the space to think. It's because you believed my sister did that something was worth pursuing. Thank you for giving me that, Claire." Vincent took the manuscript home that night and read it in one sitting. The novel told the story of 2 people from different worlds who briefly intersect during a moment of crisis, both carrying grief they don't know how to share. It was achingly honest, beautifully written, and so clearly drawn from their own experience that Vincent felt exposed, and understood in equal measure Claire had taken their truth and transformed it into something universal. She'd written about loss and loneliness, about the courage it takes to be vulnerable, about how sometimes the people who save us are the ones we least expect. The ending wasn't neat or romantic. It was ambiguous and real, leaving the reader to wonder whether the connection between the characters would survive beyond the pages. When Vincent finished reading at 3 in the morning, he sat in his study with tears on his face. The book was extraordinary. It deserved to be published. But more than that, it proved that Claire had reclaimed her voice, had transformed pain into art, had become the writer his sister always knew she could be. He wanted to call her immediately, but forced himself to wait until morning. When he finally dialed, his heart hammering, the call went to voicemail. "Claire, it's Vincent. I read your manuscript. It's stunning. Please call me when you can. I think we need to talk." She didn't call back that day or the next. Vincent tried not to obsess over the silence, but it was difficult. He'd spent 6 months respecting her need for space. But now that space felt like an ocean he didn't know how to cross. The Foundation's first event, 3 weeks later. The Foundation hosted its inaugural public reading. 5 grant recipients were scheduled to share excerpts from their work in progress. Vincent had invited literary agents, publishers, and journalists. Hoping to create opportunities for the writers beyond just financial support, he didn't expect Claire to attend. She hadn't responded to any of his messages about the manuscript, and he'd resigned himself to the possibility that she wanted to keep their lives permanently separate. So when he saw her standing in the back of the crowded reading room, his breath caught. Claire looked different. Her hair was longer, her face somehow both softer and stronger. She wore simple clothes, jeans, and a sweater, but carried herself with a quiet confidence that hadn't been there 6 months ago. When their eyes met across the room, she gave him a small, hesitant smile. Vincent wanted to go to her immediately, but the reading was about to start. He forced himself to focus on introducing the first writer, a young man whose novel about immigration had moved Vincent to tears during the selection process. The evening unfolded beautifully. Each writer read with passion and vulnerability, and the audience responded with genuine engagement. Vincent watched from the side, proud of what they'd built, but constantly aware of Claire's presence in the back of the room. When the formal program ended and people mingled over wine and conversation, Vincent finally made his way to her. "You came," he said simply. "I almost didn't," Claire admitted. "But I wanted to see what you'd built." "What Natalie dreamed of, what we built," Vincent corrected. "None of this would exist if you hadn't reminded me why it mattered." Claire looked around the room, taking in the animated conversations and the joy on the writers' faces. She would have loved this. She would have loved your manuscript even more. "Claire, it's extraordinary. Have you thought about publication?" Claire's expression became guarded. "That's complicated, because it's about us. Because it's about truth, and I'm not sure either of us is ready for more public scrutiny of what that truth means." Vincent moved closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "I've spent 6 months wondering if I'd ever see you again. If that night and everything that followed was just a brief intersection that ended the moment you left the city. But reading your words, I felt like you were telling me something you couldn't say directly." Claire's eyes glistened slightly. "I was telling myself something I needed to understand. About what we shared and what it meant. About whether connection is worth the risk when the risk is so high." "And what did you conclude?" Before Claire could answer, a young writer approached to thank Vincent for the opportunity. Then another came with questions about the mentorship program. Soon they were surrounded by people with genuine needs and appreciation. And the moment for private conversation dissolved, Claire stepped back gracefully, letting Vincent handle the crowd with practiced ease. But she didn't leave. She stayed through the entire evening, talking with other writers, asking thoughtful questions, existing in his orbit without demanding his attention, walking through truth when the event finally ended near midnight. Vincent found Claire standing on the brownstone's front steps, looking up at the building with an unreadable expression. "Can I walk you somewhere?" he asked. "I'm staying with a friend in Park Slope. It's not far then. Let me walk with you." They fell into step together, moving through Brooklyn's quiet streets. The October air was cool but not cold, carrying the smell of fallen leaves and distant rain. For several blocks neither spoke, both adjusting to proximity after months of absence. "Your father," Vincent finally said. "How is he?" "Comfortable. The facility upstate is good, and my aunt visits him daily. He doesn't always remember who I am anymore, but he seems peaceful. That's the best I can hope for now." "I'm sorry. That must be incredibly difficult." Claire nodded. "But it's also given me permission to focus on something besides caregiving. The guilt of that is complicated, but necessary. I couldn't have written the book if I'd stayed in the same patterns. The book is brilliant, Claire. I'm not exaggerating. You've created something that will resonate with people who've never experienced our specific circumstances because you've captured something universal about human connection." "Stop," Claire said softly. "Please don't oversell it. I know it has merit. But I also know publishing it means opening up our lives again to speculation and judgment. I'm not sure either of us needs that." Vincent stopped walking, turning to face her under a streetlight. "Is that the only reason you're hesitant? Or is it something else?" Claire met his gaze directly. "I left because the lines between us got blurred, and I needed clarity. I needed to know if what I felt was real, or just gratitude mixed with proximity, mixed with the intensity of everything that happened. And you needed space to grieve properly and rebuild your sister's legacy without the complication of me being part of it. And now, after 6 months, now I know the feelings were real. But I also know that real doesn't automatically mean right. We exist in different worlds, Vincent. The grant helped level that playing field temporarily. But you're still a billionaire philanthropist, and I'm still someone who spent years cleaning other people's homes. That power imbalance doesn't disappear just because we want it to. Vincent's jaw tightened. So we just walk away? Pretend that connection didn't matter because the circumstances aren't perfect. I'm not saying that. Claire's voice wavered slightly. I'm saying I don't know how to navigate this without losing myself again. I spent years disappearing into other people's needs, being invisible, being the help. Then suddenly, I was visible in the worst possible way, turned into tabloid gossip and scandal. Now I'm finding my voice as a writer, creating something that's mine. I can't risk losing that again, not even for something that feels important. The choice between safe and real, they resumed walking, the silence heavier now. Vincent understood what Claire was saying, even as it cut through him. She'd spent months rebuilding an identity that their relationship, whatever it was or could be, threatened to overshadow again. What if it doesn't have to be either or? Vincent asked quietly. What if you can have your voice and your independence and still allow for connection when it's genuine? How? How do we do that when everything about our lives invites scrutiny and imbalance? Vincent thought about that carefully. By being honest about the complications instead of pretending they don't exist. By building something that respects your autonomy and my responsibility. By refusing to let fear of judgment determine whether we pursue something meaningful. Claire stopped in front of a brownstone apartment building, presumably where her friend lived. She turned to face Vincent, her expression conflicted. You make it sound simple. It's not simple at all. But neither is writing a novel, or rebuilding a foundation, or living with grief. We don't avoid difficult things just because they're difficult. No, Claire agreed. But we should avoid them if they're harmful. Is this harmful? Us talking honestly? Me telling you that reading your manuscript made me realize I've been half alive for 6 months. Just going through motions without the connection that made those motions feel meaningful? Claire's breath hitched. Vincent, I'm not asking you to jump into something undefined. I'm asking if we can figure it out together instead of separately. If we can acknowledge that what happened between us mattered and might still matter, even if we don't know exactly what form that takes. For a long moment, Claire just looked at him, her eyes searching his face for something. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a key. My friend is out of town. I'm staying here for the week while I meet with literary agents about the manuscript. You're going to publish it? I think so. It's the most honest thing I've ever written, and hiding it feels like betraying everything I learned while writing it. She paused, then added, Would you like to come up? We could talk properly without standing on a street corner. Vincent's heart hammered. Are you sure? No, but being sure seems overrated. I'd rather be honest. The conversation that changes everything. The apartment was small and cluttered with her friend's eclectic collection of art and books. Claire made tea while Vincent stood awkwardly in the living room. Feeling like he was crossing a threshold into territory that should be approached with reverence, they sat on opposite ends of a worn sofa, cups warming their hands, the intimacy of the setting both comfortable and terrifying. When you read the manuscript, Claire began, what did you see in the ending? Vincent thought about the final pages, where the two main characters stand at a crossroads, having helped each other through crisis but uncertain whether their connection can survive beyond it. I saw possibility, he said finally. Not certainty, but the potential for something real if both people were brave enough to choose it. That's what I hoped readers would see. But I wasn't sure if I was writing fiction or prophecy. Maybe both. Claire smiled slightly. My therapist, yes, I finally got one, said the book is about learning to be whole on your own before you can be connected to someone else without losing yourself. And are you? Whole on your own? More than I was. The writing helped. The space helped. Understanding that my value isn't determined by who I'm caring for or what I'm providing, that helped most of all. Vincent set down his tea. I've learned things too. That wealth and success are hollow without genuine connection. That my sister was right about almost everything I dismissed. That being vulnerable isn't weakness. It's the only honest way to live. Those are good lessons. They are. But they're incomplete without acknowledging that you taught me most of them. Claire looked at him directly, no defenses left. What do you want from me, Vincent? Really? Honestly? I want to know you. Not as the woman who cleans my home or the writer I helped or the person I'm obligated to because of guilt. I want to know what makes you laugh and what you dream about and how you take your coffee and what you look like when you're writing something. That's flowing perfectly. A lot to want from someone you barely know. Let me know you. Give me a chance to learn those things over time, without pressure or timelines or expectations, beyond mutual honesty. Claire's eyes glistened. And if it doesn't work? If the complications are too much? Or if we discover we were just two wounded people who needed each other temporarily? Then we'll have tried. And we'll have given whatever this is a fair chance instead of letting fear decide for us. She was quiet for a long time, looking down at her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. I'm scared. So am I. But you're right. Fear is a terrible compass. Vincent reached across the space between them, not touching but offering his hand palm up. So, Claire looked at his hand at the gesture of invitation without demand. Then slowly, tentatively, she placed her hand in his. So let's be scared together, she said, and see what happens when we're honest about it. 6 months later, the launch party for Claire's novel was held at a small, independent bookstore in Manhattan. Far from the glittering society events Vincent usually attended, the crowd was intimate. Mostly other writers and readers who'd heard about the book through literary channels rather than scandal. Claire read from the penultimate chapter. Her voice steady and clear. Vincent stood in the back, watching her command the room with words she'd forged from pain and truth. She'd changed the names and details enough that only those who knew their story intimately would recognize the parallels. But the emotional honesty remained intact. When she finished reading, the applause was genuine and warm. During the question period, someone asked about the book's ambiguous ending. I wanted to write something true, Claire explained. And the truth is that connections between people are messy and complicated. We don't always get neat conclusions. Sometimes we get possibilities we have to choose every day to honor or abandon. After the formal event ended, Claire signed books, while Vincent helped the store owner clean up. It was a small gesture, but one that felt right. He was learning to exist in her world without trying to dominate it, to support without overwhelming, to be present without demanding center stage. When the last attendee had left, and Claire had thanked the bookstore staff profusely, she and Vincent walked out into the spring evening. The city was alive with the energy of longer days and warming weather, everything feeling possible in a way that winter never quite managed. Congratulations, Vincent said. You did it. Actually, genuinely published your truth. Our truth, Claire corrected gently. Parts of it, anyway. How does it feel? She considered the question. Terrifying and liberating in equal measure. Like I've finally stopped hiding.